What if we told you the most iconic love stories from classic films weren't the ones on screen? In the golden age of Hollywood, a world ruled by secrets, stardom, and seduction, one whispered promise or stolen glance could destroy careers, break hearts, or rewrite history. Tonight on Classic Hollywood, we're pulling back the velvet curtain to reveal 6 real-life love triangles so explosive, they didn't just make headlines, they shattered marriages, ruined friendships, and left legacies in ruins. Buckle up, because the real heartbreaks of old Hollywood, they were never make-believe. Elizabeth Taylor, Eddie Fisher, and Debbie Reynolds, the scandal that rocked Hollywood. In the 1950s, Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher were the golden couple of Hollywood. Debbie was the wholesome, radiant girl next door, fresh from her breakout role in Singin' in the Rain. Eddie Fisher was one of the most beloved crooners in America, with a velvet voice that soared on the charts and in the hearts of millions. Together, they were picture perfect. 2 rising stars married with 2 beautiful children, the embodiment of the American dream. And then everything changed. Their closest friends? Another Hollywood power couple, Elizabeth Taylor and her husband, the charismatic producer Mike Todd. The 2 couples were inseparable. Double dates, family vacations, glittering appearances on red carpets. Debbie and Elizabeth were more than friends. They were like sisters. Until March 22nd, 1958. That's the day Mike Todd's private plane crashed, killing him instantly. Elizabeth, only 26, was widowed, devastated, inconsolable, and suddenly alone in a world she no longer recognized. And Eddie Fisher, the best friend of her late husband, rushed in to comfort her. But his comfort turned into companionship, and that companionship quickly became something more. Their secret affair didn't stay secret for long. Hollywood whispered, then it shouted. When news broke that Eddie had left Debbie, America's sweetheart, for the grieving, sultry Elizabeth, the public was stunned. This wasn't just tabloid fodder, it was a cultural earthquake. Eddie was publicly vilified. Elizabeth Taylor was branded a homewrecker, and not just by gossip columns. Even the Vatican issued a formal condemnation. Debbie, meanwhile, became the wounded symbol of betrayed innocence. The triangle wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a global scandal. But behind the drama, there was grief, guilt, and a desperate search for meaning. Eddie later admitted that he hadn't been thinking clearly, that he was swept up in Elizabeth's sorrow, mistaking compassion for connection. Theirs was a relationship born out of trauma, not passion. He said, "I was not in love with Elizabeth Taylor. I was in love with the idea of rescuing her." Still, the damage was done. Eddie divorced Debbie and married Elizabeth in 1959. But the marriage was fraught. The spark that brought them together didn't survive the scrutiny or the weight of guilt. It wasn't long before Elizabeth's heart wandered again, this time to her Cleopatra co-star Richard Burton, igniting another Hollywood wildfire. Meanwhile, Debbie Reynolds, heartbroken but ever graceful, picked up the pieces. She raised her children and rebuilt her career. And in a twist that only classic Hollywood could write, years later, Debbie and Elizabeth reconciled. They starred together in the TV movie These Old Broads in 2001, written by none other than Carrie Fisher, Debbie's daughter, the child born from that very broken marriage. What this story really shows, it wasn't just about betrayal, it was about the intersection of fame, loss, and vulnerability, the pressure of public life, the isolation of grief, and the realization that even stars, adored by millions, can make deeply human, deeply flawed choices. Humphrey Bogart, Mayo Method, and Lauren Bacall. From chaos to classic romance. Before Bogart and Bacall became one of the most iconic couples in cinema history, there was Mayo Method, the woman who shared Bogey's name and his demons. By the 1940s, Humphrey Bogart was a household name, the tough, brooding anti-hero of the Maltese Falcon and Casablanca. But behind that cool, calm screen persona, his private life was far from romantic. His marriage to Mayo Method, a fiery, talented actress with a razor-sharp tongue, was nothing short of explosive. Friends in Hollywood called them the battling Bogarts. Their love was as intense as it was toxic, filled with jealousy, late-night fights, and alcohol-fueled outbursts. Police were called more than once. There were rumors of broken bottles, threats, even knives thrown in rage. But Bogart stayed, out of guilt, obligation, and maybe a twisted kind of love. Then came Lauren Bacall. She was just 19 when she walked onto the set of To Have and Have Not. He was 44, hardened by life and stardom. She was cool, intelligent, magnetic, and Bogey, the veteran, was smitten. From their very first scene, sparks flew. On screen, their chemistry was electric. Off screen, it was undeniable. But there was a problem, a big one. Bacall was falling for a married man, and Bogart, torn between loyalty to his troubled wife and the light he saw in Bacall, tried to resist. But love doesn't always follow the rules, especially in old Hollywood. They began exchanging love letters, whispered confessions, secret meetings. Bacall was everything Mayo wasn't. Calm where Mayo was chaotic, grounding where Mayo was stormy. Bogey wrestled with the decision for months. He knew leaving Mayo would devastate her, but he also knew he was falling for someone who made him want to be better. In 1945, Bogart finally filed for divorce. He and Bacall married just days later in a quiet ceremony. He gave her a gold whistle inscribed with, "If you want anything, just whistle." A callback to their most famous line together, a Hollywood moment, born from real emotion. Their marriage, against the odds, worked. It was built on respect, humor, and love. Together they raised a family, starred in more films, and became one of Hollywood's rare real-life success stories. But for Mayo Methot, the ending wasn't so happy. After the divorce, her career dried up. She struggled with addiction, isolation, and heartbreak. She died alone in a hotel room in 1951 at just 47. A tragic figure lost in the shadows of a golden romance. The lesson behind the glamour. This love triangle didn't just make headlines. It revealed the cost of choosing happiness and the collateral damage when love finds you at the wrong time. Sometimes a new beginning means walking away from something you once believed in. And sometimes, the greatest love stories begin in the ruins of old ones. Do you think Bogart did the right thing? Or should he have stayed loyal to Mayo? Drop your thoughts below and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story, when Hollywood's most beloved actress became its most reviled. Ingrid Bergman, Roberto Rossellini, and Peter Lindstrom, the affair that exiled a star. In the 1940s, Ingrid Bergman wasn't just a star, she was a symbol of purity. With timeless performances in films like Casablanca, Gaslight, and Notorious, she captured the hearts of audiences around the world. Off-screen, she seemed just as perfect. Married to Dr. Peter Lindstrom, a respected Swedish neurosurgeon. They had a daughter, lived a quiet family life, and appeared to be the very image of post-war stability. But Ingrid's heart was restless, and what happened next would become one of the most shocking scandals ever to rock Hollywood. Enter Roberto Rossellini, the brilliant, brooding Italian filmmaker behind Rome, Open City. Ingrid had seen his work and was mesmerized. She wrote him a letter, just one line. If you need a Swedish actress who speaks English well, who hasn't forgotten her German, who is not very understandable in French, and who can only say ti amo in Italian, I am ready to come and make a film with you. That letter was the spark that would ignite a firestorm. Rossellini invited her to Italy to star in his upcoming film Stromboli. But as the cameras rolled, so did a romance, wild, obsessive, and scandalous. There was just one problem. Actually, two. They were both married. The affair became public when Bergman became pregnant. And just like that, America's Golden Girl was now its greatest disappointment. Headlines exploded. Church groups protested. Senators denounced her on the Senate floor, calling her a powerful influence for evil. One declared her unfit for American homes. Imagine that. a star going from beloved to exiled, all for falling in love. Ingrid left her husband and her daughter, fled to Italy and married Rossellini. For 7 years, they lived an unconventional life, making films, raising children, and trying to outpace the scandal. They had 3 children, including future actress Isabella Rossellini. But the marriage, built on rebellion and fire, eventually crumbled under its own weight. Rossellini wanted a wife who was just his, not an international star. Bergman couldn't suppress her need to act, to create, to be more than someone's muse. By the late 1950s, their marriage was over. But Ingrid's story didn't end in exile. In 1956, she made her triumphant return to Hollywood in Anastasia, winning her 2nd Oscar, greeted not with scorn, but with applause. America forgave her, or perhaps finally understood her. Dr. Lindstrom moved on, raising their daughter and never speaking publicly against Ingrid. Rossellini returned to his films. And Ingrid? She continued making unforgettable cinema until the very end of her life. This was more than just a love triangle. It was a war between passion and public perception, between being true to yourself and paying the price. Should Ingrid have stayed with her family, or did she have every right to follow her heart? Comment below and tell us where you stand on one of Hollywood's greatest love exiles. Clark Gable, Carole Lombard, and Rhea Langham. A royal romance. A tragic farewell. He was the undisputed king of Hollywood, rugged, charming, irresistible. From It Happened One Night to Gone with the Wind, Clark Gable was every studio's golden ticket and every woman's fantasy. But behind the headlines and the heartthrob smile was a man trapped in a marriage of convenience. Enter Rhea Langham, Gable's 2nd wife. Wealthy, refined, and socially elite, Rhea was more patron than partner. She was 17 years older, and their union, while cordial, was more about status and stability than passion. Rhea gave Gable access to Hollywood's high society and, crucially, financial security early in his career. But as the years passed, their relationship cooled. They were polite in public, but distant in private. And then came Carole Lombard. Lombard wasn't like the other actresses. She was hilarious, gutsy, and wildly independent. With a wit so sharp it could draw blood and a heart that could soften even Clark Gable. They had met years earlier filming No Man of Her Own, but nothing came of it. She thought he was stuffy. He thought she was loud, but in 1936 they reconnected at a Hollywood party, and this time the sparks flew. Carole didn't swoon like the others. She joked, she challenged him, she made him laugh. And for a man used to being idolized, that was irresistible. Their romance blossomed quickly, but there was a catch. Gable was still married to Rhea, who refused to grant him a divorce. She knew what he had with Lombard was real, and she wasn't ready to step aside. So Gable and Lombard became the worst-kept secret in Hollywood. They lived openly together, shared a ranch in Encino, and built a quiet, rustic life far from the flashing bulbs. The studios tried to keep it quiet, afraid that scandal might sink his career. But fans didn't care. If anything, they rooted for it. Finally, in 1939, Rhea relented. The divorce was finalized. Weeks later, Gable and Lombard married in a private ceremony. No glitz, no press. Just 2 people in love. And for a moment, just a moment, the king had his queen. Their marriage was full of laughter, horseback rides, practical jokes, and real affection. Gable, famously guarded, opened up around Carole. She grounded him, and he adored her. But happiness in Hollywood never lasts long. In January 1942, Carole, ever the patriot, boarded a plane to help sell war bonds. The flight crashed in Nevada. She was killed instantly at just 33 years old. When Gable received the news, he collapsed. Friends said he was never the same. He joined the Army Air Forces shortly after. Some say as a way to cope or perhaps punish himself for not being with her. He flew combat missions over Germany. The man who played Rhett Butler was now facing real danger with nothing left to lose. He remarried years later, but those who knew him best said his heart was buried with Carole on a lonely hillside in Glendale. When Gable died in 1960, he was buried beside her, fulfilling a promise whispered in grief. Rhea Langham, meanwhile, faded from public view, watching quietly as the man who once shared her name became half of Hollywood's greatest love story. Was this Hollywood's only true fairy tale, cut short by fate? Or was it the ultimate reminder that no amount of fame can shield us from loss? Let us know in the comments, and if Carole Lombard's story moved you, stay with us. Because next we're diving into a love triangle that turned from music and glamour to jealousy, volatility, and one of the most combustible marriages ever caught on film. Ava Gardner, Frank Sinatra, and Nancy Barbato. When love was a war zone. Before tabloid culture exploded in the digital age, this was the scandal that had everyone talking. Whispered about in salons, splashed across magazine covers, and debated in living rooms. It was the story of a singer, his devoted wife, and the woman who would become his most dangerous addiction. Frank Sinatra was already a superstar. His voice crooned across every radio, his name in lights, his face framed by adoring fans. And at home, there was Nancy Barbato Sinatra, the woman who'd been with him since the beginning. They married in 1939. She was his anchor, his family, his reality check. Together they had 3 children. Nancy had been there through the lean years, before the screaming fans and the Oscar buzz. She believed in Frank before the world did, but fame has a way of testing loyalty. And then came Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was more than beautiful. She was devastating. A southern siren with emerald eyes and a voice that could disarm anyone. She had already made waves in Hollywood, known for roles in The Killers and Showboat, and for leaving a trail of broken hearts behind. When she met Sinatra in the late 1940s, the connection was instant. Charged, dangerous. Neither could resist it, even though Frank was still very much married. The affair was no secret in Hollywood. It became one of the most talked about entanglements in entertainment history. Nancy held on for a time. She had weathered Frank's infidelities before. But Ava was different. She wasn't a fling, she was a storm. Their chemistry was explosive, and so were their fights. Frank was possessive. Ava was fiercely independent. They loved hard and fought harder. The press followed them obsessively, went through blowouts, reconciliations, dramatic disappearances, and scandalous public reunions. And the damage was real. Frank's image took a massive hit. His career stalled, studios dropped him, clubs turned cold. His once golden reputation? Tainted. All for Ava. Nancy, tired and betrayed, finally filed for divorce in 1951. Within days, Frank married Ava in a rushed, quiet ceremony. But if they thought marriage would solve their problems, they were wrong. Their relationship was a roller coaster of passion, jealousy, and heartbreak. Ava hated Frank's neediness, his moods, his fading fame. Frank couldn't handle her independence or the fact that she was now more in demand than he was. He tried to win her over with gestures, grand, desperate, and often tragic. At one point, he attempted suicide when their fights reached a breaking point. Their love was that volatile. But amid the chaos, Frank made a comeback, winning an Oscar for From Here to Eternity, and eventually reclaiming his throne in entertainment. Ava stood by him during that resurgence, but their marriage was already cracked beyond repair. They separated in 1953 and officially divorced 4 years later. But here's what makes this triangle unforgettable. Even after it all, the betrayals, the screaming matches, the shattered marriages, Frank never stopped loving Ava. And Ava? She once said, "He was good in the feathers, but bad in the nest." Their love was too big for marriage, but too deep to fully disappear. Nancy, meanwhile, never remarried. She lived a quiet life out of the spotlight, raising their children and preserving the Sinatra name with grace and dignity. She remained a steady pillar while Frank chased chaos. This wasn't a love triangle, it was a collision. Ava and Frank were fire and gasoline. Nancy was the still center, the life Frank left behind but never really forgot. Was Sinatra a fool for trading loyalty for lust? Was Ava unfairly blamed for the fallout? Or was this just what happens when two stars shine too bright, too close? Let us know in the comments. And if you're loving these real stories of Hollywood heartbreak, betrayal, and forbidden passion, stay tuned. Because next we dive into Vivien Leigh, Laurence Olivier, and Jill Esmond, where Shakespearean love met real-world scandal. Vivien Leigh, Laurence Olivier, and Jill Esmond, a love too brilliant to last. Before they were Hollywood's golden couple, Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier were two rising stars on opposite ends of their most important roles, faithful spouses to someone else. In the late 1930s, Laurence Olivier was already an acclaimed British stage actor, married to fellow actress Jill Esmond, elegant, composed, and highly respected in London's theatre circles. She had married Olivier before the fame, supported his ambition, and quietly weathered his emotional intensity. Vivien Leigh, on the other hand, was married to barrister Herbert Lee Holman, a man far removed from the world of grease paint and curtain calls. Reserved and traditional, Holman never truly understood Vivien's burning passion for acting, or her restless spirit. Then fate and casting would intervened. Vivien and Larry met in 1936 while filming Fire Over England. The chemistry was immediate, both on and off screen. They shared more than attraction, a hunger for greatness, a reverence for Shakespeare, and a deep desire to push each other further. They fell hard and fast. But there was one problem. Two marriages stood in the way. At first, their affair was kept secret, but in the tightly knit world of London theater and Hollywood studios, secrets don't stay buried for long. Rumors swirled. Jill Esmond and Herbert Holman watched from the sidelines as their spouses grew publicly inseparable. Vivien, emboldened by passion, openly pursued Olivier, determined to become his leading lady, on stage, on screen, and in life. Jill, known for her quiet dignity, chose not to air her heartbreak publicly. But it was undeniable. She was losing her husband to a storm named Vivien. In 1940, after years of agonizing tension, both divorces were finalized, and Olivier and Leigh married. The world cheered. Two of the greatest actors alive, together at last. A real-life love story born from the ashes of others. At first, it was magic. They toured together, starred together, conquered both stage and screen. Their performances in Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and That Hamilton Woman electrified audiences. But behind the curtain, cracks began to show. Vivien Leigh, brilliant, sensitive, and emotionally fragile, began to suffer from bipolar disorder. Her mood swings became more severe. She was unpredictable, sometimes unrecognizable. Olivier, for all his passion, was deeply ambitious and often impatient with her emotional needs. As Vivien's mental health declined, their once dazzling connection became strained. Friends described Olivier as tortured, torn between love and exhaustion, compassion and self-preservation. Still, they stayed together. For years. Through breakdowns, infidelity, and growing creative distance. Until finally in 1960, after 2 decades together, they divorced. Vivien never stopped loving him. Even after their split, she would refer to Larry as "my husband." Olivier remarried, but when Vivien died in 1967, he rushed to her home and helped carry her body out himself. And Jill Esmond, the quiet first wife whose heart was shattered at the very beginning of the affair, faded into history, often overshadowed by the epic tragedy of Vivien and Larry. But her presence was always there, the silent reminder of the cost that greatness sometimes demands. This was no fairy tale. This was a drama worthy of the stage, complete with passion, betrayal, madness, and heartbreak. A love so intense it burned through everything in its path, and eventually consumed itself. Was this a story of destiny or destruction? Did Vivien and Larry find each other at the wrong time? Or was their downfall inevitable? Drop your thoughts in the comments. In classic Hollywood, the smiles were dazzling, but the heartbreaks, devastating. These weren't just affairs, they were legends. Love stories that defined an era and destroyed lives in the process. Which love triangle shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments. And if you love untold stories from Tinseltown's golden era, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Classic Hollywood. Because here, the real drama never needed a script.